This video is made for entertainment purposes only. I never meant to become the keeper of the world's greatest secret. My name is Thomas Merrick, and for 20 years, I lived with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. Not in any textbook. Not in any government database. Not in the minds of rational people who pay their taxes and believe what they're told. But he existed. God help me, he was as real as the scars on my hands and the silence that still fills my cabin on winter nights. This is the story of how I found him, how we survived together, and how, in the end, the world found us. It was October 2003 when everything changed. I'd been living alone in the Cascade foothills for 3 years by then, 8 miles from the nearest paved road, in a cabin my grandfather built in 1947. After the divorce, after the layoff from the mill, after my daughter stopped returning my calls, I'd retreated into these woods like a wounded animal crawling into its den. I told myself I was just taking a break, getting my head straight. But 3 years is a long time to be alone with your thoughts, and by that October, I'd become something else entirely. Not quite a hermit. Not quite sane. Somewhere in between. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. I remember because Tuesdays were when I'd hike down to Marsh Creek to check my mail at the general store. But that week, the weather turned violent before I could make the trip. Rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. Wind tore branches from the old growth pines and sent them crashing through the canopy like artillery shells. I spent that night by the wood stove, drinking whiskey and listening to the forest come apart outside. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. When it finally cleared, the forest looked like a war zone. Trees down everywhere. The creek behind my cabin had swollen to twice its normal size, brown water churning over rocks that were usually dry. Mud and debris covered the trails I'd spent years maintaining. I spent that first clear morning assessing the damage, chainsaw in hand, cutting fallen timber away from the cabin and the access road. It was exhausting work, but good. Physical. The kind of labor that stops you from thinking too much. I was halfway through clearing a massive Douglas fir that had fallen across the road when I heard it. A sound. Low. Guttural. Not quite human, but not animal either. I shut off the chainsaw and listened. The forest had gone silent. No birds. No wind. Just that sound, rising and falling like labored breathing, coming from somewhere down in the ravine below the road. Every instinct I had told me to walk away. Get in the truck. Drive back to the cabin. Lock the doors. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the part of me that was still human enough to recognize suffering. Maybe I was just too broken to care about my own safety anymore. I left the chainsaw on the road and climbed down into the ravine. The smell hit me first. Wet fur. Blood. Something else I couldn't identify. Musky and thick, like nothing I'd ever encountered. I followed the scent through tangled blackberry brambles and over moss-covered stones, my boots slipping in the mud. And then I saw him. He was lying on his side in a shallow depression beneath an overhanging rock face, half buried in mud and wet leaves. At first, I thought it was a bear. The size was right, maybe 7 feet long, bulk like a grizzly. But then I got closer and saw the shape of him. The arms were too long. The head was too large, too flat across the face. And the hands. Jesus Christ, the hands. 5 fingers. Thick, spatulate, caked in mud and blood. Human hands, but wrong. Bigger. Stronger. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. This was a costume. A hoax. Some kind of sick joke. But then he moved. His chest rose and fell in a shallow, rattling breath. One of those massive hands twitched, fingers curling slightly. And his eyes, dark, intelligent, filled with pain, locked onto mine. I should have run. Instead, I knelt down in the mud beside him. His right leg was shattered. I could see it even through the matted fur, bone fragments pressing against the skin, the whole lower leg bent at an unnatural angle. The storm must have brought down a tree on him, or maybe he'd fallen from higher up the ravine. Either way, the injury was catastrophic. He watched me as I examined him, those dark eyes following my every move. There was no aggression in his gaze. No fear, either. Just a deep, exhausted resignation, like he'd already accepted death and was simply waiting for it to arrive. "Easy," I whispered, more to calm myself than him. "Easy, big guy." His breathing hitched. A low rumble came from deep in his chest. Not a growl, but something closer to a groan of pain. I had no medical training beyond basic first aid. No idea how to treat an animal this size, let alone a creature I couldn't even name. But I knew he was dying. And I knew that if I walked away, I'd be leaving him to a slow, agonizing death in the mud. So I made a choice. I went back to the cabin, loaded my truck with supplies, and returned with a heavy-duty tarp, rope, and enough wood planks to build a makeshift sled. It took me 4 hours to rig a pulley system strong enough to haul him up out of the ravine without causing more damage. He didn't fight me, didn't resist. Just lay there, breathing hard, watching me work. When I finally got him onto the sled and started dragging him up the slope, he let out a sound I'll never forget. Not a scream, not a roar. Something softer, almost grateful. By the time I got him back to the cabin, the sun was setting, and I was shaking from exhaustion and shock. I dragged him into the old equipment shed behind the cabin, the only space large enough to hold him, and covered him with blankets. Then I sat down on the floor beside him, staring at this impossible thing I just brought into my life, and tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. He didn't die that first night, or the second, or the third. I spent those early days in a kind of trance, moving on autopilot. I set his leg as best I could, splinting it with plywood and duct tape, wrapping it tight, praying I wasn't making things worse. I cleaned his wounds with peroxide and covered them with gauze. I brought him water in a bucket, which he drank slowly, carefully, like he was rationing every drop. He never made a sound unless he was in pain. And God, there was a lot of pain. I gave him ibuprofen, crushed tablets mixed into water, because it was all I had. I don't know if it helped, but he took it without protest. At night, I could hear him breathing through the thin walls of the shed, each breath labored and wet, and I'd lie awake wondering if this would be the night he finally gave up. But he didn't. Slowly, impossibly, he started to heal. By the end of the first week, he was sitting upright. By the end of the second, he was eating. I'd started bringing him food, apples, raw vegetables, jerky, whatever I had, and leaving it on a wooden crate near the door. At first, he ignored it. But hunger won out eventually, and I came in one morning to find everything gone. He watched me constantly now. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, like he was trying to figure me out the same way I was trying to figure him out. I started talking to him. Not because I thought he'd understand, though part of me wondered if he might, but because the silence was driving me insane. So I'd sit on an overturned bucket near the door and ramble about nothing. The weather. The firewood supply. Memories of my daughter when she was young. He listened. I don't know how else to describe it. He listened. His eyes would track me as I spoke, his head tilting slightly, like he was processing every word. And then, one day, he responded. It was late November, almost 2 months after I'd found him. I'd just finished changing the dressing on his leg, still splinted, still healing slowly, and was gathering up the used bandages when he made a sound. Not a growl. Not a grunt. A low, resonant hum. Almost musical. I froze. He was looking directly at me, one massive hand resting on his chest, and he hummed again. 3 notes, rising and falling in a deliberate pattern. "Are you trying to talk to me?" I asked, feeling ridiculous. He tilted his head. Then he raised one hand, slowly, carefully, and tapped his chest twice. I stared at him. He tapped his chest again, then pointed at me. "You," I said softly. "And me." He huffed, a sound that might have been agreement, and lowered his hand. That was the day I realized he wasn't just an animal. He was a person. We built a language together over the next year. It wasn't English. It wasn't words. It was something older, simpler, gestures, sounds, expressions. He'd tap his chest to indicate himself, point to objects to ask questions, use his hands to describe shapes, actions, intentions. I named him Isaac, not because it meant anything to him, but because I needed something to call him besides the creature or big guy. He didn't seem to care. Or maybe he just tolerated it, the way you tolerate a well-meaning friend mispronouncing your name. By the spring of 2004, his leg had healed enough for him to walk. Not well, he had a permanent limp, a hitch in his stride that would never fully go away, but enough to move around the shed, to step outside on clear nights and stand beneath the stars, breathing the cool mountain air. I built him a better space, reinforced the walls, added a wood stove for warmth, brought in blankets and cushions to make a bed. It became less like a shed and more like a room. His room. He never tried to leave. I don't know if it was gratitude, or fear, or simply an understanding that the world outside wasn't safe for him. But he stayed. And I stayed with him. Month after month. Year after year. We fell into a rhythm. I'd check on him every morning, bring him food, sit and talk, sometimes for hours. He'd listen, occasionally responding with those low, musical hums or careful gestures. On warm days, we'd sit outside together, him leaning against the cabin wall, me on the porch steps, both of us watching the forest in comfortable silence. I stopped going into town except for essentials. Stopped checking my email. Stopped pretending I had a life outside these woods. Isaac became my life. And for 20 years, that was enough. Sheriff Dalton knocked on my door on a Tuesday in June 2023. I should have expected it. I'd missed my annual vehicle registration. Hadn't been down to the county office in over a year. Someone must have flagged it, run my address, decided to send a deputy out to check if I was still alive. I opened the door to find Dalton standing on my porch, hand resting casually on his belt, sunglasses reflecting the afternoon sun. "Tom Merrick?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "That's me. Sheriff Ben Dalton. Just doing a welfare check. Your neighbors down in Marsh Creek mentioned they haven't seen you in a while." I almost laughed. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles away. But I kept my expression neutral. "I'm fine, Sheriff. Just prefer the quiet." He nodded slowly, scanning the property over my shoulder. "Mind if I come in? Just want to make sure everything's all right." "Do I have a choice?" "Course you do," he said, smiling. "But it'd make my day easier." I let him in. He walked through the cabin with the practiced eye of a man who'd done 1,000 wellness checks before. Looked at the firewood stacked neatly by the stove. The clean dishes in the sink. The bookshelf full of old paperbacks. "Place looks good," he said. "You doing all right out here on your own?" "Better than I was in town." He nodded. "I get that. Some folks just need the space." He moved toward the back window, the one that looked out over the yard and the equipment shed. "What's in there?" he asked, pointing. My blood turned to ice. "Storage," I said quickly. "Old tools. Junk from my grandfather. Mind if I take a look?" "It's locked. Don't have the key on me." He turned to face me, and for the first time, his expression shifted. Not suspicious, not yet, but curious. "You seem nervous, Tom. Just not used to company." He studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tell you what. I'll swing by again next week. You can show me that shed then. Sound good?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He tipped his hat and walked out. I sat on the porch for an hour after he left, my hands shaking. Isaac must have heard the conversation. When I finally went to the shed, I found him standing near the door, his massive frame tense, eyes locked on me. He hummed, 3 low notes, descending. "A question." "That was the sheriff," I said quietly. "He's coming back." Isaac tilted his head. "And when he does," I continued, "he's going to want to see inside this shed." Isaac's expression didn't change, but his hands moved, slow, deliberate gestures. Palm down. Flat. Then a sweeping motion toward the forest. Hide. Where? I asked. You can't run. Not with that leg. He tapped his chest twice, then pointed at me. Then he made a fist and held it over his heart. Together. I felt something break inside me. 20 years of silence, of isolation, of pretending this could last forever. And now it was ending. I don't know how to protect you, I whispered. Isaac stepped forward, closer than he usually came, and placed one enormous hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was staggering, but the touch was gentle, almost tender. He hummed again, soft, reassuring, and I understood. He wasn't asking me to protect him. He was telling me he'd protect me. Sheriff Dalton came back 6 days later. This time, he brought a deputy. I was splitting firewood when I saw the patrol car rolling up the access road, dust kicking up behind it. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to keep working, to look calm, unbothered. Dalton stepped out first, followed by a younger man in uniform, Deputy Reese, according to his name tag. "Morning, Tom," Dalton called out. "Brought some company this time. Hope that's all right." "Not much choice in the matter," I said, setting down the axe. "Just want to finish that check we started last week," Dalton said. "You mentioned that shed. Figure now's a good time to take a look." My pulse hammered in my ears. "Sheriff, with all due respect, I don't see why." "Tom." His voice was firm now, no more friendly pretense. "I'm not asking." I looked past him, toward the shed. The door was closed. No sign of movement inside. But Isaac was in there. And I had no idea what was about to happen. Dalton walked toward the shed with Deputy Reese trailing behind. I followed, my mind racing through a dozen scenarios, none of them good. "I'll need you to open it," Dalton said, stopping in front of the door. "Sheriff, I really don't think." "Open it, Tom." I hesitated. Then I pulled the key from my pocket and unlocked the door. The hinges creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the shed was dim, lit only by slivers of sunlight, coming through gaps in the walls. The air was thick with the smell of fur and wood smoke. And there, in the back corner, partially hidden in shadow, was Isaac. He was sitting on the floor, his massive frame hunched, hands resting on his knees. His eyes glowed faintly in the low light, calm, steady, locked onto Dalton. For a moment, no one moved. Then Reese gasped. "Jesus Christ!" Dalton's hand went to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. His face had gone pale, his jaw slack. "Tom," he said slowly, not taking his eyes off Isaac, "what the hell is that?" "His name is Isaac," I said quietly. Dalton's head snapped toward me. "What?" "He's been here for 20 years. I found him injured. I took care of him." "That's not," Reese stammered, backing up a step. "That's not real. That can't be real." Isaac shifted, and both men flinched. But Isaac didn't stand, didn't charge. He simply raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, and tapped his chest twice. Then he pointed at me. Dalton stared. "Did it just—" "He's trying to tell you he's not a threat," I said. "He's telling you we're together." Dalton's hand was still on his gun. "Tom, you need to step outside. Right now." "No, Tom." "If you draw that weapon, he'll defend me," I said, my voice shaking. "And you'll both die." Dalton's eyes widened. Isaac hummed, low and resonant, the same three-note pattern he used to greet me every morning. And then he did something I'd never seen him do before. He stood. Isaac rose to his full height, 8 feet of solid muscle and fur, his head nearly brushing the ceiling beams. The shed seemed to shrink around him, and both Dalton and Reese took an involuntary step back. "Holy shit," Reese breathed. "Holy shit." Dalton's hand tightened on his gun, but he still didn't draw. His training was fighting his instincts, every fiber of his being screaming danger, but his experience telling him not to escalate. "Tom," he said, voice tight. "Tell me what I'm looking at." "I don't know what to call him," I said honestly. He's not human. But he's not an animal, either. He's something else. Isaac took a slow step forward, his limp pronounced. Reese yelped and drew his weapon, a Glock 22, standard issue, trembling in his hands. "Don't!" I shouted. But Isaac didn't stop. He moved past me, placing himself between the deputies and me, his massive shoulders squared, his dark eyes locked on Dalton. He wasn't threatening, wasn't aggressive. He was shielding. Dalton saw it too. I could see the realization dawn in his eyes, the same realization I'd had 20 years ago in that ravine. This wasn't a monster. This was a person. "Lower your weapon, Reese," Dalton said quietly. "Sir, that thing. Lower it." Reese hesitated, then slowly lowered the gun, though he didn't holster it. Isaac hummed again, softer this time, almost questioning. "He's asking if you're going to hurt me," I said. Dalton looked at me. "You can understand it?" "Him," I corrected. "And yes, we've had 20 years to learn." Dalton holstered his sidearm. Slowly, carefully. Isaac watched the movement, then tilted his head, an almost human gesture of acknowledgement. "Tom," Dalton said, his voice strained, "I need you to tell me everything. Right now." We moved outside. Isaac followed, slowly, cautiously, and settled himself against the side of the cabin, his eyes never leaving the two deputies. Dalton and Reese stood a safe distance away, hands near their weapons but not on them. I told them everything. The storm, the ravine, the broken leg, the years of silence, the language we'd built, the life we'd shared. Dalton listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Reese just stared at Isaac, like he was trying to convince himself this was real. When I finished, Dalton let out a long breath. "Tom, do you have any idea what you've done?" "I saved his life. You've been harboring an unknown, potentially dangerous entity for 2 decades without reporting it to anyone." "He's not dangerous," I said sharply. "He's had 1,000 chances to hurt me, and he never has. That doesn't matter. If word gets out, then don't let it get out." Dalton looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Tom, I'm a county sheriff. I can't just cover this up." "Why not?" I challenged. "Who does it serve to report him? The government? The media? You think they'll treat him with compassion? They'll dissect him, study him, lock him in a cage and call it science." Dalton said nothing. Isaac shifted, drawing both men's attention. He raised one hand and made a slow, sweeping gesture, palm up, fingers curling inward. Then he pointed at Dalton and tapped his own chest. "Trust." Dalton stared. "Is he asking me to trust him?" "He's asking you to trust us," I said. Reese finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Sir, we can't just walk away from this." Dalton didn't respond immediately. He looked at Isaac, really looked at him, studying the intelligence in those dark eyes, the careful way he moved, the deliberate gestures. Then he looked at me. "If I report this," he said quietly, "you lose him. You know that, right?" "I know." "And if I don't," he trailed off, shaking his head. "If I don't, I'm complicit. If something happens, if he hurts someone." "He won't," I said. "You can't guarantee that." "Yes," I said firmly, "I can." Isaac hummed. 3 notes. Rising. Dalton closed his eyes. Took a breath. Then he pulled out his phone. My heart stopped. "Sheriff." "I need to make a call," he said. "And you're not going to like who I'm calling." The black SUVs arrived at dawn. 4 of them, unmarked, rolling up the access road in perfect formation. No sirens. No lights. Just the low rumble of engines and the crunch of gravel under tires. I'd known they were coming. Dalton had warned me the night before, after his call. He wouldn't tell me who he'd contacted, just that it was above his pay grade, and that I should cooperate fully. I'd spent the night in the shed with Isaac, both of us sitting in silence, knowing this was the end. When the SUVs stopped, Isaac stood. He moved to the door, his massive frame blocking the entrance, and looked down at me. He tapped his chest, pointed at me, made a fist over his heart. Together. No matter what, I whispered. He hummed. The men who stepped out of the SUVs weren't police. Weren't military, either, at least not officially. They wore dark suits, earpieces, sunglasses despite the early morning gloom. Federal agents. Black ops. The kind of people who show up when something needs to disappear. A woman in a gray blazer led the group. Tall, sharp-featured, carrying herself with the kind of authority that comes from years of making hard decisions. She stopped 10 feet from the cabin and looked at me. Thomas Merrick. I nodded. I'm Director Sarah Wren, Department of Anomalous Entities. I understand you've been housing an unidentified cryptid for 20 years. His name is Isaac, I said. Is it contained? He's not an animal. He doesn't need to be contained. That's not your determination to make. She gestured to the agents behind her. We're here to secure the entity and transport it to a research facility for study. Like hell you are. Her expression didn't change. Mr. Merrick, you violated multiple federal statutes. Harboring an unknown biological entity, failure to report a potential national security threat, obstruction. He's not a threat, I said. He's a person. He's an unknown. Then get to know him. Behind me, Isaac stepped out of the shed. Every agent reached for their weapon. Isaac moved slowly, deliberately. He stepped past me, placing himself between me and the agents, and raised both hands, palms out, fingers spread. A universal gesture. Peace. Director Wren stared. Is it communicating? He's asking you not to hurt us, I said. Tranquilize it, Wren ordered. No, I shouted. 2 agents raised tranquilizer rifles. Isaac didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands raised, eyes locked on Wren. And then he did something I'd never seen. He spoke. Not in gestures, not in hums, in words. No harm. The voice was deep, guttural, barely recognizable as language. But it was unmistakable. Every agent froze. Wren's face went pale. Jesus Christ. Isaac lowered his hands slowly, pointed at me, then at himself, then made a fist over his heart. Together, he said. His pronunciation was rough, broken, but clear. Wren stared at him for a long moment. Then she lowered her hand, and the agents lowered their weapons. Where did you learn English? She asked. Isaac looked at me, tapped his chest, pointed at me. Him, he said. Wren took a step forward, her expression shifting from clinical detachment to something else. Oh, maybe even fear. How long have you been able to speak? Isaac tilted his head, thought for a moment, then held up 2 fingers. Then 0. Then 0 again. 20 years. Wren's jaw tightened. You've been able to speak this entire time, and you never said anything? Isaac pointed at me again, tapped his chest, made the fist over his heart. Safe, he said, and I realized, with a jolt, what he was telling her. He'd stayed silent because silence kept him safe, kept us safe. But now, with everything falling apart, he was willing to risk everything to protect me. Wren turned to me. How many words does he know? I don't know, I said honestly. He's never spoken before. Then how? He's been listening, I said. For 20 years. They didn't take him. Not that day, at least. Wren ordered her team to stand down, and we moved inside the cabin. Me, Isaac, Wren, and 2 agents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Isaac had to duck to fit through the door, and even then, his head nearly brushed the ceiling. We sat around the small wooden table, the absurdity of the situation not lost on anyone. A cryptid and a hermit, negotiating with the federal government. Wren folded her hands on the table. Mr. Merrick, I'm going to be blunt. This situation is unprecedented. We've dealt with cryptids before, sightings, alleged encounters, but nothing like this. Nothing intelligent. He's not a cryptid, I said. We don't know what he is, Wren interrupted. And that's the problem. Until we do, he's a security risk. Isaac hummed. 3 notes. Descending. Wren looked at him. Can you understand me? Isaac nodded. Do you understand why we're here? Another nod. Then you understand that we need answers. Where you came from. What you are. Whether there are others like you. Isaac's expression didn't change, but his hands moved, slow, deliberate. He pointed at the floor, then swept his hand in a wide arc, encompassing the mountains beyond the cabin walls. Here. You're from here? Wren asked. From these mountains? Isaac nodded. Are there others? Isaac paused. Then he raised one hand and made a gesture I'd never seen before. Fingers spread, then slowly curling inward, one by one, until his hand was a fist. Phew. Wren's eyes widened. There are more of you. Isaac nodded again. How many? Isaac held up both hands. Opened and closed them twice. 20. 20 individuals, Wren murmured, almost to herself. Jesus. Where are they? One of the agents asked. Isaac pointed toward the mountains again, made a sweeping gesture, then tapped his chest and shook his head. Not there. Here. You're alone, I said quietly. Isaac looked at me. His eyes were full of something I'd seen before but never fully understood. Grief. He tapped his chest, pointed at the floor, made a fist over his heart. You stayed here because you were hurt, Wren said. Because he helped you. Isaac nodded. And the others? Your family. Isaac's hands moved again, slower this time. He pointed at the mountains, made a gesture like water flowing. Then a sudden, sharp motion, like something breaking. Gone. A flood. I asked. Did something happen to them? Isaac hummed, low, mournful, and I understood. The storm that had injured him 20 years ago, the one that had sent trees crashing down and swollen the creeks to rivers, it hadn't just hurt him. It had killed the others. Wren sat back, her expression unreadable. So you're telling me that Isaac here is one of the last survivors of an unknown intelligent species, and he's been living in Thomas Merrick's shed for 2 decades. Isaac nodded. And you never tried to leave? Never tried to find other survivors? Isaac pointed at his leg, the limp, then pointed at me, tapped his chest, made the fist over his heart. Couldn't. Stayed. Together. Wren looked at me. You saved his life. He saved mine too, I said. Just in a different way. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood. I need to make some calls. In the meantime, Isaac stays here. You both stay here. No one leaves. No one talks to anyone outside this property. Understood. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to figure out how to keep this from becoming a shit show, she said bluntly. And hope to God I can. Wren's calls took 3 days. During that time, the property was locked down. Agents patrolled the perimeter. A communications blackout was enforced. No phones, no internet, no contact with the outside world. It felt like living in a prison, except the walls were invisible and the bars were federal agents with assault rifles. Isaac handled it better than I did. He spent most of his time in the shed, sitting quietly, occasionally humming to himself. I brought him food, sat with him, tried to reassure him that everything would be okay. But I didn't know if it would be. On the 3rd day, Wren returned. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her blazer wrinkled. She sat down at the table and rubbed her temples. I've spoken with the Secretary of the Interior, the Director of National Intelligence, and the President's Chief of Staff, she said. And I've come to a decision. My stomach clenched. Isaac is classified as an endangered intelligent non-human entity. Under emergency powers granted by the Endangered Species Act and the National Security Act, he is hereby placed under federal protection. I blinked. What? He's not going to a research facility. He's not being dissected or studied against his will. He's being protected. I don't understand, I said. Neither do I, Wren admitted. But the president's science advisor made a compelling case. If Isaac is truly one of the last of his kind, then he represents an irreplaceable piece of Earth's biodiversity. More than that, he's intelligent. He communicates. He has rights, even if we don't fully understand them yet. So, what happens now? Now, Wren said, we cover it up. The official story was simple. Thomas Merrick, reclusive mountain man, had been keeping an exotic animal illegally. The animal, a rare and endangered species whose exact identity was classified, had been relocated to a secure wildlife sanctuary for its own safety. Sheriff Dalton corroborated the story. Deputy Reese was reassigned to a desk job in another county and signed an NDA. The few neighbors who'd heard rumors were visited by federal agents and politely discouraged from spreading them. And Isaac was given a choice. Wren explained it to him using simple words and gestures, and I translated where I could. He could stay with me, under federal supervision. The property would be designated a protected habitat, and agents would monitor from a distance. Or he could be relocated to a government facility. Comfortable, safe, but isolated. Isaac didn't hesitate. He pointed at me, tapped his chest, made a fist over his heart. Together. Wren nodded. Then it settled. The agents left after a month, replaced by a rotating detail of wildlife monitors who kept their distance and filed reports I never saw. Life returned to something resembling normal, though nothing would ever truly be the same. Isaac and I fell back into our rhythm. He stayed in the shed, though I expanded it, added insulation, a better stove, shelves for the books I'd started bringing him. He learned to read slowly, painstakingly, sounding out words with that rough, guttural voice. He never spoke much. Words were difficult for him, and he preferred gestures. But on quiet nights, he'd sit on the porch with me and say small things. Stars. Cold. Home. And once, just once, he said my name. Tom. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The years passed. Isaac aged, though I didn't know how to measure it. His fur grayed at the temples. His movements slowed. The limp worsened. I aged too. 60 became 70. 70 became 80. My hands shook. My knees ached. The forest that had once felt endless began to feel smaller, closing in. But we stayed together. Director Wren visited once a year, always alone, always unannounced. She'd sit at the table, drink coffee, and ask Isaac questions. He'd answer in his halting, broken English, and she'd take notes. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me once. "Staying here? Giving up everything?" "I didn't give up anything," I said. "I found everything." She smiled. Knowing. "The world would have destroyed him," she said quietly, "if you'd reported him. If the media had found out. He'd be in a lab, or a cage, or dead." "I know. You saved him, Tom. More than you realize." "He saved me too." Isaac died in the winter of 2043. It was peaceful. Quick. He'd been weakening for months, his breathing labored, his appetite fading. I'd known it was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. I found him one morning, lying on his bed in the shed, his massive chest still. His eyes were closed, his face calm. I sat with him for hours, holding one of those enormous hands, crying like I hadn't cried since my daughter was born. And then I called Wren. They buried him on the property, in a clearing overlooking the valley. No headstone. No marker. Just a cairn of river stones, built by hand, each one placed with care. Wren stood beside me as the sun set, her hands in her pockets, her expression unreadable. "He was one of a kind," she said. He was, I agreed. What will you do now? I looked out at the forest, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the cabin where I'd spent 40 years of my life. I'll stay, I said. This is still his home. And mine. Wren nodded. We'll keep the detail. Keep the property protected. For as long as you're here. And after, she said, it becomes a reserve. Protected forever. So no one else can disturb it. Good. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the stars come out. And then, faintly, I heard it. A hum. 3 notes. Rising. I looked around, but there was nothing. Just the wind through the trees. But I smiled. Goodbye, Isaac, I whispered. I'm 92 years old now. I don't have much time left. My heart's failing. My body's shutting down. The doctor's in town. Yes, I finally started seeing them. Give me 6 months. Maybe less. But I'm not afraid. I've lived a full life. A strange life. A life most people wouldn't believe if I told them. But I'm telling you now. Because the world needs to know that there are things out there we don't understand. Things that deserve compassion, not fear. Protection, not exploitation. Isaac was real. He was intelligent. He was kind. And he was my friend. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means Director Wren has decided to release this account to the public. I don't know why she'd do that. Maybe because the world has changed. Maybe because people are finally ready to hear the truth. Or maybe because she wants to honor Isaac's memory the way he deserves. I don't know. But I hope, whoever you are, that you'll remember him. Not as a monster. Not as a myth. But as a person. Because that's what he was. And that's what he'll always be.